Hi guys, my name is Shelby Doyle and this is our third public programs lecture. Third, okay. So I'm pleased to introduce Wendy Fok. Wendy holds a Bachelor of Arts in Architecture and Economics from Columbia University, a Master of Architecture with a certificate in Urban Policy and Planning from Princeton University, and a Doctor of Design from the Harvard University Graduate School of Design. She was a teaching fellow at the Harvard Law School from 2013 to 18. She is the founder of Resilient Modular Systems and Code Collective, which I imagine many of you have used. She received the Hong Kong Young Design Talent Award in 2009, Perspective 40 Under 40 Award in 2011, ABC Young Guns 11 Award in 2013, and Digital Kluge Fellowship at the Library of Congress in 2014 and 15. She was selected for Autodesk Pier 9 Artist in Residence Program in 2016 and named to Autodesk Remake's list of 25 women in reality computing in 2017. Her award-winning projects have been exhibited internationally as part of South by Southwest, Venice Biennale, Beijing Design Biennale, and Shanghai Expo, among others. She is the co-editor with Antoine Picon of Digital Property Open Source Architecture, which is the book for sale right outside of the auditorium if you guys want a copy. So please join me in welcoming Wendy Fok.
Hi everyone. It's a pleasure to have met a lot of you and saw some of your projects today, or at least 2 studios. Can you hear me? Kind of. So it's my first time here in Iowa State in general. I think it's quite exciting for the thunderstorm that we had to drive through. It's very reminiscent of tropical storms. So essentially today I'm going to kind of talk about the sharing economy and the growth that I think most of you have participated in, and a lot of it is to do with my research, my doctoral research, but it's actually kind of a conclusive and continued research that I'm doing academically and also professionally. And so in part, some of the projects that I'm going to show you are kind of challenging the future of work and the future of automation, and then how we're looking at the industrial age post roboticism, and also kind of looking in how we are kind of looking at a means of challenging the way that architecture is viewed. As most of you know, the future of construction is increasing after that kind of slump of like 2008 and like the post-economy. So a lot of the kind of annual construction rate also is piquing a lot of interest within the building industry, but also beyond that, the AC industry is also challenging a lot of the kind of ways that we could be, as designers, as architects, as creators, look at new economies of making. So one of the kind of incubators or research labs that I started at Parsons is the Future Factory. Future Factory is literally just futurefactory.cc, CC for Creative Commons. A lot of the kind of research that we're looking here is led by myself, but it's mostly kind of incubated by Parsons students. And a lot of the research is kind of in a digestible snippet, kind of a like soundbite of projects that engage the city, engages citizenship, engages open access and economy, but it also looks at larger issues that are throughout like challenging urban landscapes, but also urban policy, and how we are engaging as citizens of the world. Some of the projects beyond that is kind of figuring out with the students. So this took about a semester of work of just visual identity, working through looking at the branding of it, and we went through several iterations, and these were only with 2 research assistants, and then kind of beta testing the sites and kind of front-end development. A lot of the work that I engage in the academic sphere is also fostering new generation of creators, is what we're looking at as a means of the Making Center. So the Making Center is a new kind of creation location for Parsons. It was $45 million fundraised project. And the Making Center at the new school is open to kind of a rapid prototyping. I think, Shelby, you had a really great showcase of what your students are doing and extending this throughout the new school. So one of the exciting aspects of what we're trying to do at the new school is to kind of consolidate the different programs, including School of Constructed Environments, School of Design Strategies, School of Fashion, into having an open space for students to work in the center of New York. A lot of my own work that we look into is kind of looking into open market innovation. So this is kind of a borrowed and reinterpreted diagram from Yule & Co. And their creative director was looking more on like the viability and desirability of things. But for me in my research, I look at a lot of like how people, business, and technology kind of comes into play. So a lot of it is not only looking at architecture as a means of just building a building, but is also perhaps building an experience. A lot of the research that I'm going to show you for the next few slides is just a quick gloss of some case studies that I've done for my doctoral that leads to kind of the idea of what we're actually all very curious and also very kind of critically looking at in terms of what new technologies have been authoring. We are at this day and age where 3D printing is viable, and funny enough, this gun, I'm sure most of you know, was open source and downloadable in 2013. But after, I would say, like within 3 to 6 months of open sourcing it, Cody Wilson was thought to shut down the file, and it wasn't actually until like maybe 3 months ago that this file was reinterpreted and uploaded again, because he actually was served a legal kind of cease and desist of open sourcing this file. But before it was actually closed down, many people already downloaded it, so it actually questions the ethical use of technology, right? Beyond that, there are kind of ways and uses of 3D printing, of whom I'm assuming a lot of you have already been researching on as well. Printed materials. Another colleague of mine, if you're interested, is David William Klein. He's, I think, the chair or director of the graduate program at SciArc right now. He's essentially rigged a machine that uses an inkjet printer to print biological cells, so that you could actually use it both for research, for art, and kind of looking at new organic waste materials. And beyond bioprinting, you also have like chocolate and all this other stuff. And even like in Shelby's class, I saw you guys are exclusively looking at ceramics as another way of printing. One of the machines that was kind of coded as one of the most innovative and questionable in terms of whether or not open source is accessible is the machine called Ember. This was a machine that was really under wraps when I was at Autodesk. Everyone was like, oh my God, we're gonna open source this 3D printer, and we're gonna have everyone being able to access it. However, the thing is, this machine also comes with a $3,000 price tag. So in essence, you are open sourcing certain aspects of mechanic exploration, but it is, again, questioning the ways that you could actually use a machine if you had $3,000. So within a lot of these research that I've been looking at, it's also looking at the maker movement in one aspect. Again, these are very snippets of case studies. If you really want to read this, it's about like a 200-page dissertation that you could read. These are just kind of certain case studies that I've been looking at, including the way and the exponential growth, both economically and also as a movement of the maker fairs. So as a business, it's actually very interesting to kind of see the publication itself garner a very large following that then proliferated a kind of localized and regional development of fabrication. So what you actually know now as West Elm doing a localized printing stores, or like buying a local farmers market type of fabrication in your neighborhood, or having access to your 3D printing or CNC store, that has been because of this kind of incremental interest in maker fairs and everyone wanting to do it themselves. But the question of the desirability of the demand of individuals making things themselves is whether or not everyone should have access to be making things themselves, right? These are questions I've been kind of looking at as a whole. And then as we scale up, we look at WikiHouse as one other example of which is looking at the future of homes, how homes could be, again, open source as a way of democratizing several different kind of economies, but also the localized collaborative means of developing community for the residential industry. Again, the critique of something like WikiHouse is whether or not, again, the word access is available. Can you access a CNC router within the means of your university or in the localized manufacturing industry and to have access to the file, but can you actually make it? So I think there is still this chasm between the development of technology, the use of technology, and then there are ways that the larger community and public could have access to it. And as we go on and scaling up and up and up, Elemental, Alejandro Averina has also looked at a way of open sourcing his housing plans and or developing it as a providing access to common kind of housing systems that are allowing you to have free access again. But again, all these case studies I'm trying to show you within kind of networks, within commons, is the critical discourse of whether or not having access is the same as being able to be building upon this access. I think one of the studios that was trying really hard to do this was Benjamin Burkle and UN Studio. They tried to start this platform 4 years ago, unsuccessfully wrote a lot of white papers that are really great for the industry, but still the tools and processes that are involved is very kind of high level and only accessible towards design individuals, architects, construction individuals, contractors. What it did actually start to proliferate in the architecture world is enabling individuals to kind of think of whatever they're researching in-house on if they could actually allow others to develop with them. So within that model, I think outside of architecture, it's very interesting to kind of see like the Tech model, which was founded in 2002, sold to Dassault, and then joined Trimble like 2014. The way that Geary technology is based on CATIA, it's based off of a CAD-based program. It's also Frank Geary's baby on a software company. So if you're actually looking at it as a twofold collaborative software and hardware, meaning architecture as with a capital A and also software as a means of development, I would say like perhaps Geary Tech is also kind of bridging that discussion. But I think at least my way of viewing this is that the future of robotics and the future of work is actually not grounded within architecture. I'm sure a lot of architects in here would be kind of critical on that, but I think a lot of private companies beyond architects are developing ways to create outside of what we actually could do in building a solid foundation of kind of manufacturing. So in a way, if you actually see architecture as a means of manufacturing, there's a very interesting discourse of looking at prefab, looking at modular, looking at just ways to churn architecture out like cars, essentially. Because if you look at it in a like larger perspective, Elon Musk right now has been and like for the past 5 years working on smart homes beyond the kind of technology and the privatized world, in startup world, and funding faster than the pace of architecture. One thing, this is the old administration, unfortunately, and maybe fortunately for some of you. I think it's very interesting in Obama's administration and the kind of policy aspect of what we're looking at advancing like open citizenship engagement is the ability for policy to actually gain ground in developing ideas. I think one aspect of allowing these types of research to happen needs to be along the lines of grounded within policy work. So a lot of, I think what I'm trying to bring in with Future Factory, for instance, is to kind of partner with the City of New York. We are actually looking at the Center for Innovation, which is actually a leg of the city and Gov, and seeing if there's ways to incubate ideas beyond just the academic aspect of looking at cities and how it's built. Back to, again, the discussion of technology and the discussion of people. I think the viability of what we're actually looking at needs to be a process that is gained through market innovation and experience. I don't think architecture right now is going along the trend of just purely having a star figurehead. It's not ego-driven anymore. It is actually very bottom-up and collective in the sense that all of you are probably the next architects with an S that will build together. There is more kind of this idea and concept of innovating through collective means. So one of the things that I would show just in terms of what we've developed in research in the classroom atmosphere and then looking at cities and how it is actually explored in design objects is a recent project we just did for the Venice Biennale in a collateral exhibition called Biodata Matter. We were curated by several with other exhibitors. And one of the things that we were looking at is extracting biodata from the Gowanus Canal. It is known as one of the biggest super sites. Super sites are super sites are known to be where it's highly polluted. So a lot of the work that we were doing was based on solutions that the city were already interested in developing. So we were extracting a lot of the data and the interest of what we could represent both visually and biologically from New York City alone. So like some of these forms that I was talking about in Shelby's class where we're growing mycelia is to look at whether or not we could grow it with different types of bacteria. So if you're gonna be spitting in it and having a lot of gross bacteria in it, would it actually grow the same way? And in the office, we just kind of experimented with different types of means. So in a sense, for the exhibition, we're trying to perceive different modes of visually representing essentially bacteria and data into objects. And the means of how do we represent them were through kind of just very simple, just like design objects. We had a constraint of it being 3 by 3 inches. We were also kind of driven by the idea that there's different types of materiality and every material that we're using has to be biodegradable. So we actually worked and partnered with a staff lab technician who extracted various means of E. coli and just gross stuff from the East River, the Gowanus Canal. It was quite exciting to kind of learn that there's more than just feces and dead people or fish or whatever in your river system. But I think there's actually a kind of playfulness towards how we're actually representing them. So there is kind of, again, we were looking at the project beyond just a means of kind of, it's provoking discussion in the realm of architecture. So these are some iterations. The other project that I think Shelby was highly kind of talking about is a resilient modular system project. This is a twofold project. What we're trying to do, and this is purely a benefits corporation. So for those who know what a benefits corporation is, we are kind of enlisted in Delaware. We're looking at as a purely publicly funded and or challenge funded project. So in its own sense, this is its own startup. And it's purely done through calculations of, this site right now is open source. We're going to upload new files that allow you to download the original, the actual file that you could actually use to make. We've experimented as mostly just with AECOM to test out the scaling of the product, whether or not it could be bigger than 15 feet by 15 feet. Critically speaking, I think one of the experiments that we're very interested in is looking at it beyond materiality. What kind of materials can we use? How do we make it? And the way that we can make it. So these are kind of things that we're looking in the formwork. We're also partnering with MakerBot. We were working with policymakers, and to kind of see what kind of ways we could do and geometrically conceive the brick beyond its kind of buildability. So there's a classical brick example, and it's kind of how do we innovate it and make it accessible to people that are beyond your location. Again, it's probing into localized manufacturing, and we're not married to the shape. I think it's more the concept of having access to it. The other kind of things that we talk about is one of the biggest things that we're trying to do right now is to kind of unify the larger discussion of the fabrication in New York City. So one of the biggest, there's several different players that are in the field of New York as a whole. I don't know if most of you have heard of New Lab. Who here has heard of New Lab? There's like 2 people. New Ink, maybe? Anyone heard of New Ink? There's not a lot of news, and so a lot of these like new fabrication hubs are actually non-institutionally partnered. ADO is another one that's actually sponsored by BMW and me, the car company. And so what I'm trying to do is kind of work with FutureWorks, which is a city-based funded platform that is looking to kind of consolidate the different players within New York City into promoting fabrication within like a larger multi-borough project. This is both kind of residue from the Bloomberg era to what de Blasio right now is very interested in pushing to kind of make New York more than just a fintech hub for those fintech, financial tech. One of the other things, the kind of newest project that's become its own monster is a company that is called New Territory. It's more of a real estate co-living development that we're in the fundraising phase of. We're partnering with nonprofits along with kind of inner city foundation for working with like at least donating 1 or 2% into kind of, I would say, moving technology and also social enterprise in one sphere. We're looking at building communities, building neighborhoods, and also allowing change makers to have a place to stay. So if you think about, I would say, Airbnb and Soho House, having a baby, that is actually more kind of socially engaging. This is probably where we're going. One of my mentors, David Bell, he's the guy who founded New Lab, and he's very kind of experienced in the past 15 to 20 years into kind of public and private companies. He built a lot of these partnerships through real estate. So he was actually quite interested in how we could make this feasible within a $5 million kind of under handling. So one of the kind of larger kind of research that we've been looking at is how are these different kind of co-work, co-living, co-everything exist. Where we exist is kind of in between like an upscale ambiance and a younger hipstery kind of location. I'm not going to disclose anything more than that for right now, but it's probably going to be a New York, LA kind of situation. Very different from what we're actually working on redesigns, but it is actually, we're trying to use this as a motivator to kind of see if it works in kind of real life incubated idea. So it took like 2 years of hard research, kind of basically a 60-page white paper on We Live, on why it works, why it doesn't work, and then we're convincing investors right now to kind of give us money to build this. So who are we trying to get here? We're trying to, I'm considering this like a creative change maker. For us at least, how we determine change maker is somebody who's actually designing a company. That could be you, and it could be someone that doesn't really fit in the young professional realm, or you're an older entrepreneur in the Asian society, but still you're single and you're traveling a lot, and you're still kind of going from LA, going to New York, and like going to Austin, and like mentoring startups. So all these people kind of live together, perhaps incubate ideas, but they're not living together for a prolonged period of time. So I think if you're in cities, that probably makes more sense. I don't know if this is actually a good model for Iowa, for instance, but for just the baseline of what normal rent is in New York, it's about $2,000 for a room. So to get a good room, you would probably need to pay around $2,500 to $3,000. And again, I don't know what the rental rates are here, but in New York, less than that, okay. So I think one of the kind of key factors here is that you're putting together individuals that are highly curated that you probably will not meet unless you're at a conference or you're at some other event that's similarly to those type of people. So it's a career-focused, like IRL, LinkedIn opportunity, essentially. And so moving on to something more playful, less like academic, I'm going to talk a little bit about like what we design is, right? So what a lot of, at least I do, is essentially encompassing these 3 words. It's design technology and creative solutions, and this is really what we actually do. This is a photo from our research and fabrication lab next to the new museum. For those who know, it's in Soho. It's like on Bowery, and we actively do projects. We kind of create kind of novel experiences, experiments, and also we work as a cluster of 5 or 6 people, depending on kind of artifacts that make sense or not make sense. These are some projects that we've done in the past. It goes from like small scale, and you can kind of see the reiterations in larger scale. This is a project we did in Boston for the kind of Nuit Blanche version of Boston. It was for the city of Boston, and it was a little booth. One of the newest projects that we're working on, to just give you a sampling of what we do, is Jason Naylor. I don't know if most of you go to Insta, you can probably see like he is basically a graffiti artist and is very 2D. A lot of his things are very kind of colorful. He's done stuff with Mac, he does stuff with Sephora. And what we're trying to do is kind of enliven his designs and our kind of experience in kind of a pop-up sphere and work on something that's kind of encompassing like 3 aspects of what we love doing, which is strategy, and spatial, and merch. One of the ways that we actually structure our business is kind of like looking at projects beyond the scope of just spatial. So we try to discuss with a client, and this could be across kind of new, like different type of branding clients, that we're not only offering you to build something, which is generally what architects do well, but we also run the gamut of looking at ways to produce and also fully explore ways to look at technology and integrating a package that could be delivered beyond just the spatial work. One of the things that we actually look at also is the creative strategy behind it is campaign work and also digital fabrication. So one of the kind of aspects that we are engaging in is a lot of times looking at limited edition items. So for instance, Gary Baseman, he is an illustrator, but he also, throughout the years, worked a lot in kind of crossover projects with Coach, the clothing brand, and also different kind of activations. So these are kind of some of the projects we are looking at as a marketing aspect, but it's also kind of a way to do pop-ups. The most recent project that's probably of interest, just 2 days ago we got covered by BBC London, and we were looking at ways to kind of activate our senses. I would say, traditionally speaking, this project is to kind of look into kind of nostalgia, memories, and kind of walking down memory lane in a sense. But research-wise, going beyond the context of how we're looking at, smells, we're actually engaging a lot with our senses beyond smells. And so this project in its own, we're looking at development of, with 3 major players in the United States that are actually interested in making sensorial experiences. And so one of the things we're doing like essentially Willy Wonka style scratch-and-stick wallpapers for a room. This is part of the London Design Biennale, and it's still on. If you guys are in London next week, you could still experience this. And we essentially went and dwindled it down to 4 major smells that are reminiscent to Hong Kong. So since it is Hong Kong Pavilion, we were looking at roasted duck, egg tarts, temples, and more importantly, opium. Opium has been a great drug of trade, but it also has been a flower that has been represented in various ways. So these are kind of just diagrams of how we're executing this and suggesting this to the curators. And within that aspect of developing just the kind of spatial strategy, we were also looking at how do we create the digital strategy. So we went through kind of a holistic means of designing the space, designing the package, designing the branding, designing the digital. And a lot of it is kind of content creation, because I think the modern architect no longer just designs for space, and you need to start designing for digital space. And all of these are kind of intertwined in how we actually think of design. So we did an open call. The logo here, without the September, was designed by Pentagram, and we designed the Hong Kong Pavilion logo and playfully engaged on aspects of how the wall and the roasted duck could also have a larger play within social media because we had to do a social media takeover with the London Design Biennale team. So a lot of these are kind of, so you probably see like these are some of the egg tarts and whatnot. I think most of the Asian students here have probably had an egg tart, and if you guys haven't, definitely try it out. So the other things are just like visual elements. It's a very 2D project. We wanted something that was passively engaging, but also passive in terms of technology. Because a lot of the projects we've done, I would say in the past 8 to 10 years, are highly activating in terms of digital. It always has LED, always has lighting, it always has some sort of plug and play. So what we're trying to do right now with this project, surprisingly, out of the 40 countries that are part of this Biennale, we're the only project that didn't require like an on and off switch. So I think there is a larger discussion on whether or not technology could go with or without kind of electricity. What is sustainability? Does it have to be greenwashed? These are kind of questions we always kind of have in-house in terms of designing. So I think there is an aspect of design beyond just saying, oh, is sustainability about, you know, being able to just put a green logo somewhere, using something of the colors palette that's, you know, maybe green, brown, and beige or something. But there are visual communication strategies beyond that. So these are kind of different aspects of it. These are people engaging on it. This is the room itself. That's me. And then this is kind of like the demo of accessing the space. There's no music, so it is just literally a person going up to a wall and smelling it. This is actually Camille, one of our junior assistants. She really made this project possible. So again, it's very passive, but surprisingly, we've gotten a lot of positive feedback on it. It was like Time Out London, considered it one of 4 pavilions to visit. And again, it's activating space beyond what you would consider, you know, architecture, because there is that aspect of playfulness to it. Another project that recently we've done, and we're still continuing this relationship with Overthrow, is with a crossover project with Overthrow and Ellen von Unwerth. I feel like this is like a dated project, and unless like you were born, I don't know, before the 90s. So Ellen von Unwerth was known as fashion photographer for like a bajillion years for like working with Guess as the brand. You might recall her with all the campaigns with Testino that had like voluptuous women, and it's just like black and white with a tease of red. So Ellen is trying to use Vaughn magazine to kind of reactivate the larger discussion of the relevance of her brand. So Vaughn is the new launch of her magazine, and we work with Overthrow, which is a boxing company, to play with if there's a way to kind of play up the authenticity of like Lower East Side New York from like the 80s to the 90s. And the launch party was one of the biggest things that we worked on, but beyond that, the other thing that we worked with her was on celebrating the magazine. It was first launched in LA with like Miley Cyrus and like Hailey Clausen, it's a model thing. And then so this was another event that we had done with them in the New York location. And the thing that I want to highlight here is we were doing mostly these merch pendants, which were locally produced, locally designed, and also locally made in New York. So it's the idea that what I wanted to bring and why I'm bringing out this project is that, again, looking at design beyond the means of fabricating just anything and everything, and how do you actually use it in an aspect that, you know, a traditional jewelry designer and or fashion brand would not use. I think most of the fashion people were very confused on what do you mean you could 3D print 18 karat gold or anything. We packaged it, and these were given to VIP people, but it was also part of this larger launch, which is very quote unquote on brand with Overthrow because it has a certain aesthetic for the Lower East Side. So again, like this is kind of one of these projects that we're activating and looking at 3D printing beyond just a means of making various different things that are like maybe just kitschy, like modular things. So I'm showing you a gamut of what you could do with technology, that's not purely what you actually envision in architecture school. The other kind of projects that we are actually actively working on right now is a Redefining Luxury conference at Parsons. We just kind of finalized on the discussion here. We're bringing a lot of industry speakers to kind of develop the larger discussion on what quote-unquote luxury is. One of the key people that I really want to speak at the conference is Gary White. He is the CEO of water.org. I don't know if most of you know, but it's kind of looking at the scarcity of resources as a means and what is considered luxury, right? I think in the first world, we might consider, why is water something that you should be concerned of? But in emerging climates and emerging countries, that is something that's a resource. So again, it's kind of looking at ways of what someone is considering luxury. It's not like who has the most Celine bags goes to this conference. But anyways, it's more of a New York thing. So these are kind of several iterations of visual communication and branding. We're trying to question, is having, is street labels like Supreme considered luxury? Is LVMH considered luxury anymore? Or are we kind of now looking at the new forward speakers of luxury? So these players right here, like Christopher Lacey, he's the director of experience at Barney's. Karen Rubin, she's the VP of talent and global recruitment at Dior. So Dior is probably one of the brands in at least the LVMH group that's really pushing for diversity and larger discussion and inclusiveness of race, female workers, and kind of a better way of sourcing their materials. And the list goes on, and we're just trying to kind of activate that discussion locally within a design school that's not just focused on one topic. And one of the larger things that we're interested in, Ben Crosky is also part of the panelists. He's the executive director of Center for Architecture in New York. One of the larger kind of discussions and exhibitions that they're having right now is a zero waste exhibition. So again, we're trying to kind of give a cultural and innovative relevance to what luxury means, and also the next step of this conference is to kind of see, gauging from the students' feedback and the faculty's feedback on how do we develop a curricula that's engaging beyond just political issues or design issues that are using resources in Parsons for luxury, so to speak. So again, I mean, like I'm keeping to my time of like 35 minutes, 40 minutes. The book that really explores a lot of this issue, which is upstairs, is part of the AD series. If you're interested in more of the nerdy discussion, I'll be happy to sit down with you one-on-one. But right now, like, this is basically a lot of the research that I've done in my doctoral, and a lot of it is engaging on the discussion of what it does it mean to open source visual and physical property, what it means to have access to ownership of information, and what happens when you're actually manufacturing something here and like it's duplicated in China, and you're actually worried that whatever you're designing is going to be produced before you even have done it. So some interviews and anecdotal stories were actually from mentors of mine. Like I spoke with Patrick Schumacher when they actually had issues of this building in Guangzhou actually getting built at the same time that a developer in Chongqing was actually building the same building. I mean, it's not really the same building, but it was very scarcely and creepily similar. So these are kind of like issues of how does the international legal intellectual property law has protection of what you're designing. I think as designers ourselves, we need to be kind of cautious of where you're actually sourcing your materials, how you're actually ethically borrowing, and the ways that you could access or just share knowledge. These are things that I think a lot of my colleagues like Jose Sanchez and are really interested in. Carl Ratty is actually doing that with MIT Sensible Cities Lab, and I think a lot of these colleagues kind of probe into a larger discussion of what access is. This is just larger as a book and right on time. This is my information. There are so many other projects I could actually show, but I don't know if I want to go into it. But anyways, yeah, so this is me. If you want to contact me, feel free to email me or DM me or something.
I have questions. Okay, questions.
This works. I'll bring you the microphone. Oh. Of course you have to be all the way at the top front.
did all this start? Like, for you, like, how did you get to this point? Like, from architecture school and graduating, and then now, like, how did, I don't know if that makes any
It seems like
sense.
a common question through like seminar studio and just like datum. Okay, so I think one of the larger things that really provoked me into doing what I do is because when I was doing it, maybe like 10 years ago, no one else was mentoring me through the process. I was very lucky to have had the education I had, the people I had met, but they're very traditionally architecture with a capital A, which is why it led to AD Journal. I love what I'm doing right now with my research, but I also think there's an aspect of at least my practice or redesigns or even new territory that the current education in architecture is not providing. And so in a sense, I went back and started teaching. It was because that I'm trying to activate a discussion of being a creative entrepreneur that I think the architecture education right now is still lacking. These are discussions I've had with Renan at SciArc. They're, again, but SciArc is kind of like always the architecture that never touches the ground, right? So Renan's developing a program that's very kind of, you could end up doing New York's video, but never really doing architecture either. So I think there needs to be a middle ground. You're not going to end up doing like everyone's music videos, but you're not also only purely spending 15 years of your life designing handrails or toilets or like handicap. Because I think there is a balance of how do you actually access architecture. And I think within my realm of designing for the city or designing for urban access, it's not just purely one definition of architecture. And for me, I started this from looking at all the different firms I've worked for, and then kind of sitting down with, I don't know, like pricks and be like, why did you start Kocimski? Like, it used to be a rebellious firm in the 60s where architecture literally burns, all the way through kind of talking to Patrick and Zaha and saying like, okay, so your business model doesn't work, right? Now it really works because now there's a lot of projects and Zaha's passed, but then there's also kind of a larger discussion of where you allocate architecture and what does architecture mean. I think personally I went through a lot of iterations of that. A lot of my mentors, I've apologized extensively to, such as Professor Anonymity, who thinks there are more traditional ways of nurturing the field. I think what I was trying to do is just to challenge that the core of what architecture means. So I started it because I didn't feel like I had that mentorship. And also, I think one of the active players and discussions I have with another mentor of mine, or two of mine, is, again, I spoke with the datum individuals. It's Guy Batiste, he started MakerBot, and he sold it for 450K, like 450 million, right? And that's a startup company, that's a fabrication facility, and he's starting something else out at Peak Sales right now. To someone who is traditionally trained as a graphic designer, like Natasha Jen, who's a partner at Pentagram. And she does everything from the bamboo and ice cream vegan branding to kind of like spatial design. I think one aspect of being a flexible designer and whether or not you want to call yourself an architect is how do you design? And so for me, I didn't feel like I was getting that from the firms I traditionally worked at. And so I kind of try to play up my own thing with obviously some very amazing people. So I think that's my niche. I don't think this is like for everyone. Like perhaps not everyone wants to work with fashion brands or cultural brands and museums, because to be very honest, like they don't pay. So like just because we might be working with Complex, you might get a great ad out of it, but it doesn't. There's like different things that you want to value, and I think for us the cultural value is very important, and that's something cultural meaning kind of like common culture, not and artistic culture, and that going and working with artists is also a very important aspect of what we do. So that's something that at least we value within our firm.
Another question.
Okay. So it is a little bit long. I already wrote it.
I like you be critical for ethical using for new technology, but have you ever questioned the notion of shared economic? Maybe, because I only take Home 1, Home 2, maybe it's a dumb question. But based on my experience, the Airbnb business, they're working for the shared houses for more affordable traveling experience. Their website says they can warrant extra 17% income for the middle class by sharing their home with others. I do agree this model would massage a certain social issue like housing, but have you ever thought about the negative side of shared system? For example, in San Francisco, where Airbnb headquarters located, the housing price doubled or even tripled in past 10 years. Does this 17% revenue or the benefit from the shared system could help this disadvantages in cities?
Is that the question?
Yeah.
That's a lot of great stats. I think one aspect that I think shared housing or co-living has challenged city officials is the same thing as Uber, right? It really kind of caps the. Okay, so there's several issues here that you bring up. I think one of the major issues with shared housing in major cities is the accessibility of different kind of economic groups being able to live together. But I think the one, at least for us, Airbnb is a very different model, and it grew into a monster that it is now, and it provides local tourism and like guides and everything to local experiences that you could get from going to Paris and talking to someone that's French and like lead you through like a plethora of different things from shopping to food, right? That's the niche that Airbnb has been able to cater to. WeWork, same thing. WeWork, did not really work because it actually opened too many keys at one time. It was also targeting adult dormitory living. But I think there's two very valuable questions that you're bringing up. I mean, all of you are in the like millennial and Gen X, probably millennial Gen X generation, early Gen X. And the issue is home ownership has drastically declined. You have higher student debts, you have higher debts in general, you're not buying, you're not having as many kids, you're also critically not interested in ownership. You want access. And that's one thing that these kind of services are enabling you to do, right? So that's the slope of economic value that has nothing to do with traditional architecture, meaning a building. So access is different to ownership in the sense that your property value, like meaning like ownership as like if I were to own this thermos or if I was to own a laptop. The rental, it's no longer about rental, it's actually about a shared experience. I mean, how many of you here would rather pay money to go on vacation than buy a house? Like vacation, who wants to go on vacation more? And who wants to buy a house? I mean, that's the reality, right? New York Times every quarter advertises that. Wall Street Journal has like hard stats on consultants that research this stuff.
And Doug has a question, and he's new, so we're...
So anyway, so yeah, I could go on like a long rant on that, but I mean, it is an interesting trend. So that 17% that you bring up in Silicon Valley, that is also a very inaccurate 17%. You're looking at a population of Silicon Valley, which is majority male, white, and racial diversity very slim. Be white or Asian actually. So that's also a very different discussion. And Bay Area is actually more expensive to live in than New York. So you kind of have to see where it's located and analyze it that way. I mean, again, I could go on this conversation forever. But yeah, that's just like larger research that I'm very passionate about. And again, the real research and hopefully will succeed in seeing as a MVP minimal viable product is new territory. And I'm trying to see if that actually even works.
Thanks very much for that lecture. And I'm very pleased to see you addressing this question of access and the idea of sharing. And I wondered really what your reflections were on the relationship between automation and access, which I think you dealt with more in the earlier part of your talk. And kind of noticing especially that you're presenting the kind of Tesla model as something that architecture might learn from, and I'm sure you're aware that there's a deep history of that within architecture. This is what Le Corbusier does. He looks at Ford and says, okay, this is how architecture should be. But you know, what Ford did and what is happening with Tesla and other companies is they are following a long-established pattern in capitalism where automation is not something that happens because the technology is available, but as a means to unemploy the workforce. So it produces greater inequality, and therefore that makes access more difficult. So I wonder what you kind of thought about the kind of tension in the relationship there, and perhaps relatedly, I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on ideas about commoning. So, for example, and this is like not so many questions from you, but like I'm saying this to everyone else here. I mean, there are models like with print. I mean, there are websites like the Library of the World, and where their policy, if one can count it as such, is just to make everything available. It's like a sort of contemporary form of piracy, and that is a form of sharing as well. So I'm just wondering what your thoughts were on that relationship between automation and the idea of access as well, and the idea of sharing.
Okay, so I think automation on its own is one question on a commentary on like post-Fordism and capitalism and like Marxism, like I guess like Marxism in terms of how production is one play, and then commons, meaning like data. Is it data sharing also, or just?
Yes, I suppose it is data sharing. Yes, because it's using the fact that the large publishing corporations.
Right. So that was actually legal.
Publish books and data.
Right. So Google tried to do that.
Yeah.
Unsuccessfully,
Yeah.
and was sued up the wazoo for that.
Yeah.
And it became a legal case, and it became federal. I think it became federal. I forgot what district. But one of the larger discussions of commons, I think there's a difference of like democratizing all the resources and books and having ownership. So Google tried to do that with scanning all the books up beyond 30% of what it, so I don't know, I think most of you probably know this, you can't scan a book above 30% in for like educational use, right? So, I mean, for your personal use and distribution is a little like nerdy on that, but realistically speaking, like, I think there needs to be a moderator. I mean, Wikipedia, that's what all the people employed to do is moderate facts. But I think there's a fine line between open sourcing or like just Creative Commons. Creative Commons is actually interesting because, I mean, according to my law professor and mentor, Terry Fisher, he is one of the co-founders of Creative Commons, and one of the biggest things that they research on is whether or not there's a litigated case on Creative Commons and was it actually used in court. So it is not currently, but a lot of the information that, let's say you share on your website and you're saying Creative Commons attribution derivative or whatever, right? So it means like someone could actually use it as long as they cite you for it. But one of the larger issues, I think, with data, like open sourcing, and then also print, I think it's two different things. I think Library of Congress is currently having that issue. When I was at Visa Researcher there 2-3 years ago, I worked at the Copyright Office in addition to the Kluge Center, is how do you actually, this is actually interesting because they were having issues with like IMK donating his drawings to the Library of Congress. How do you have people have access to it that is not, having like photography, right? And then what happens when a deceased architect then donates those 3D files? What format and how do you let people borrow it? So these are kind of issues that are beyond print. I think for me, I'm not a print specialist, I must say. I'm more interested in the object or the CAD file. Like what happens, like the impetus of a lot of what this happened was literally from academic sourcing to manufacturing. What happens, like what has happened to my colleagues, my friends, and everyone else as a student that designed something and we also didn't want to get manufactured in Asia. There's that kind of territorial dispute, the governance, and then it comes back to policy and law. So I think that's one aspect. data is also very interesting because Latanya Sweetney, if you guys don't know her, she's very interesting. She worked for Gov for many years, and she did her PhD at Carnegie Mellon. One of the interesting aspects is she was able to gather up to, I think, 73% accuracy of your social security number through publicly sourced information, such as, at that time, Facebook and any other resource. So like any social media that you put up, it is actually sourced, and you're able to aggregate it, right? I mean, it's not difficult in a certain means. You have the right algorithms to find that information. But I think the next level of that is how privatized companies are using that information. So I think one of the questions that I'm personally interested in, and whether or not this is a common related question, is how do we, A, have access to it, because everyone here could derive an algorithm with publicly sourced materials to get your social security number. Then go to WebMD and sell your health information. And then what happens? I have access to all your history of health benefits, and the government ends up having your information. That's how Facebook made this whole flaw, right? Cambridge Analytics all over again. So essentially, one of the kind of larger interests that I have is actually ethical use of material, and I think it's more closely related to perhaps architecture students, designers who have ability to disperse files. Yes, I think automation comes into play, and this is, I think, what we're trying to do with resilient modular systems. The countries we were researching on were mostly emerging countries, so the case studies, like the economics behind that, and all the kind of breakdown of whether or not we should even be building a house under $3,000 is all in Colombia, Dominican Republic, and I also took a trip down to Cuba to see if that's even, everyone's building a cinder blocks and everyone's doing a tin and steel roof, right? So is that the economy that I want to hit? Colombia is the best out of all of them. Best emerging country, very technology focused. The only issue is it's like going through a new kind of policy change thing because of new president and everyone else. But I think these are kind of larger issues that I wanted to engage with resilient modular systems as a project. But I don't know if I'm like yapping. If you want to like ask me a question, just ask a question. I go on.
Okay. One thing that I was thinking about, listening to your whole lecture about the idea of accessibility and technology actually being accessible for the people and creating something that is for the people, made by the people, if you will.
I'm not Fubu, but yes.
No, of course. Greatest clothing line of all time, of course.
Yeah.
I've always thought about it as technology always starting off as something that is only for the 1%. So we always are talking about the idea of Apple, and they always keep emphasizing, we're going to make this accessible for everyone, but then yet they set a price tag that only certain people can actually attain, if you will.
Yeah, so that's a large issue that we're actually trying to address on the conference, actually.
And so that was the question I was going to ask you, is this idea of fully accessible technology even possible because of this need of capitalism and trying to always make a dollar off of somebody else's needs?
Well, I see, this is where I don't think I agree on. So I'm on the advisory board of Made in Brownsville. I don't know if most of you know or where. You know where Brooklyn is, I'm assuming, right? Okay. So yay. Okay, so Made in Brownsville started with by my colleague Cordine, and Cordine was from Brownsville. Brownsville is probably America's #1 place where every 3 Black American is stop and frisk around the corner. So I'm one of the advisors on the technology board, and it is for incarcerated youth, right? The idea is that there is kind of common denominator of you could blame it on capitalism, but I think education is where all of this needs to come in, and I think education is really what's driving larger sectors of work in nonprofits and benefit corporations are trying to kind of nurture, again, back to the word change maker. So again, this is where New Territory is interested in, and this is why I think the business model that we're trying to access is to work with Made in Brownsville, to work with ICNF, and to kind of work with inner city organizations that utilize individuals who come and stay there to kind of share knowledge. Because at the end of the day, like if you're an incarcerated youth editor, like you're 16 and you were caught like just petty theft, and then what happens to your next step in life? You know, that really limits your next step. So what Maiden Brown's, I mean, again, I can't pitch for what Cordine is doing, but what he's trying to do with the organization, I think it's very worthy to mention, is that like he got like Forbes 30 under 30 and like all this bunch of awards. But what he's trying to hustle for is the discussion that every youth has a right to technology and innovation and everything else. So they're actually building like a fab lab in Maiden Brownsville. They got funding for it, publicly funded. It's nonprofit, it's 501c3, and what they're trying to do is to kind of educate the community, right? At the end of the day, like if you could use Photoshop and you could also kind of edit some art director's, like I don't know, set or something, that could lead you to like furthering your career and creating different opportunities. So at least like, again, like everyone has a different view. I actually see that education could be potentially something that could offset the blame. But yes, the Redefining Luxury Conference, we are trying to address the issue of a $600 phone. Surprisingly, I'm very tech forward, but my phone is 4 years old. So like there are kind of issues I think that are larger in play, and Apple is definitely, you know, that they have been a player within that's kind of reaching a bunch of discussion.
Okay, I think there are probably some more questions, but we're going to adjourn, and there is, their book is up here, and Wendy will hang around for a little bit if you want to ask questions. But if you could join me in a round of applause and say thank you.